Just fucking do it. Subscribe now. Alright, welcome to this special video. So in this video, I'm going to take out this sea anemone and then add it to my little 14-gallon innovative marine. So there's 3 anemones in this aquarium and I was given one of them. So I took the smallest one because even the smallest one's pretty big. So there's 2 ways to take out an anemone. One is to use a power head and to blast the water right into the anemone. Eventually the anemone will detach and then you can just pick it up. Another method is, since I don't have a power head, is basically take the anemone out and have the oral disc underwater and its foot out of the water. That's usually the best way. Eventually it'll detach itself. So you always want to take your time with the anemone. So it took me about 30 minutes to get this anemone out. So right here you're going to see me put the anemone back and then Re-Aquascape along with the other anemone that was on there. I'm going to have to re-scape it a little bit, kind of put everything back how it was. I actually came to do a water change in this aquarium, but that's going to be for another video. Make sure you stick around for the next one. So if you want to see the progress of this aquarium, make sure you click on all my videos. And then I always talk about something different and I always try to bring something new to the game. But like I said, the aquarium hobby is pretty easy and you shouldn't be struggling with your aquarium. Both fresh and saltwater are pretty easy. You just got to know what you're doing and know the differences and similarities. You'll be surprised on how similar they really are. You know, every tank is different, but they all follow the same basic principles. So if you're having problems with the aquarium, start with your water chemistry, followed by your lighting, and then your water flow. And then think about feeding, and then your filtration. There's no tank that's too hard for me. Even on your tank, just hit me up and then we'll turn your tank around and you'll finally have a tank that you actually enjoy. I used to have a lot of anemones in the past, so I'm pretty much done. And what I like to do is put the anemones into glass jars or any of my corals, and then I start acclimating them in these jars. So these glass jars are really cool because you could adjust the temperature real easy. And the glass transfers the energy pretty well. So you can see me add quite a lot of iodine into these little jars while I'm acclimating. One is because I know I kind of damaged the foot off the anemone just a little bit on one side. And then second is you want to create a little barrier and disinfect your corals and your anemone. So this little layer of iodine, it helps also prevent infection from your corals that are currently in your aquarium. And then also the little frag that you're adding. So you're going to see me add iodine to both the coral and the anemone. And I'm also going to be acclimating them real slow. So if you pay close attention, I was acclimating this anemone for a good 12 hours. I left it overnight also. So as I'm adding water into the jars, I'm adding more iodine because I want to have a high concentration of iodine to help the anemone heal. So about every 15 minutes, half an hour, or even 45 minutes, add a little bit of water. Since I'm using these little small glass jars, you want to be careful. You want to add water slowly. And depending on the concentration of your elements and the pH, you want to go either slower or you could even speed it up a little bit. Both of these waters, or both of these tanks, the 65 and the little 14-gallon, are under my water chemistry. And an anemone is basically like a little balloon. So you want it to disinflate and then absorb water from your aquarium into its tissue. And then that's when you know you're pretty much good to go. So an anemone, the best way to explain is it's kind of made up of 3 parts. The oral disc, the little stalk, and its foot. And the oral disc has a little mouth in the center. And right now, even though I'm not in this video, but I can see it's kind of splitting in half. So it might have 2 anemones. I think it's splitting so it could get rid of its weak foot. And also the second anemone will just have to heal up itself. So if you do everything that I'm doing, you can have a pretty good success rate with your anemone. And even if it's damaged, like I said, you want to make sure you add some iodine in there. If your anemone is pretty healthy, you probably don't need to add iodine, but I would still add just like 1 or 2 drops to make sure. But if you know your anemone is damaged, because I know I probably damaged a little bit of the foot, you want to add a lot of iodine, kind of like how I'm doing, but I only add 1 or 2 drops at a time and then keep filling the glass jar up and then dumping it and then refilling it. So if you look at the anemone, it's usually expanding and even traveling within the little jar. So that's why it's really important to kind of take your time with an enemy. So just follow everything that I'm doing and you'll pretty much are set and you're good to go. And like I said, you just gotta have the proper water chemistry. And if you struggle with your water chemistry, make sure you hit me up. And if you're even gonna go a step further, you wanna try some of the salt that I use or that I make myself. And like I said, all the elements will be in there. Your calcium, potassium, magnesium, everything's gonna be in there. The carbonate. And like I said, the only thing I dose for this aquarium is just a little bit of iodine and the essential elements. So something you don't see it off camera is I dose a lot of iodine into the aquarium while the anemone's healing. That way I could guarantee that no bacterial infection will happen to the anemone. So usually if your water is too acidic, you're going to see the anemone kind of shrivel up. That's not a good sign, but you can see the anemone expand its tentacles pretty well even in the jar. So my favorite anemones are always the bubble tips, followed by the long tentacles. I really like the rose anemone and the green bubble tips. The long tentacles, I really like the green and purple long tentacles. Those are really cool. I find that some clowns, or most of the clowns, they really like those long tentacles. Another enemy you could try are the carpet anemones. Only those are pretty aggressive and you just gotta watch out because they grow pretty big. So this little innovative 14-gallon marine tank, I designed it so it could be an anemone tank with its two clowns. Then after, I was just gonna build a reef around the anemone. Also for social media, make sure you check out my social media. I'll put it in the link in the description. I find the prices of anemones are going higher. Usually just the brown ones or the dull color ones. Sometimes even the ones that have been bleached out a little bit will be sold a lot cheaper. But for a healthy rose anemone or even a green bubble tip now, they're pretty expensive now. So I really like these clowns. I like how they paired up. It's a black one with an orange one. We'll see how the babies come out if they decide to breed. But for sure, they were hosting hair algae, so I know they could host. I just hope they were able to go inside this anemone. But this tank was pretty much built for this anemone, and then all these other corals, I'm just going to build around the anemone. So if you compare this 14-gallon with my 2-gallon, you're going to see it's pretty much the same system. And honestly, you could be able to do the same system and replicate it at home. So this little tank is pretty basic. There's nothing special about it. I'm just using the little Kessel 880 tuna blue. So in the little 14-gallon innovative marine, I run my aquarium light probably like in that 50-50 mixture of white and blue. On my little 2-gallon, it's mostly on the blue side, probably like 75% blue. I usually try to run the temperature to be around 78 because it's kind of cold right now. It's the winter months. The aquarium kind of drops down to like 72. All right, so when you add a little bit of iodine into the jar, you can see a little iodine cloud. And what I'm doing is I want to make sure I kind of get rid of that cloud as fast because I don't want high concentrations of iodine hitting the anemone. After a while, I only add water to the anemone and then I dump some of the water from the anemone into the coral frag on the other jar. I think the most important thing to do is to, no matter what salt brand you use, you want to have your pH high. If your pH is low, it's going to dissolve your corals and your anemones are going to start shrinking up, and then eventually you're going to see them disappear or even melt in front of you. So I'm using a sponge from a little cascade filter and I'm going to cover the overflow and to be able to slide the little filter sponge. I just got to cut it so I could put the lid back on. So filter sponges are a pretty good way to cover the overflow box. That way you don't lose your anemone through the overflows. I lost a lot of anemones through the overflows and then also through power heads. Probably 90% of the time I lose them through the power head. Sometimes if your clowns don't host an anemone, usually it might be a color thing. They might even want the green bubble tip rather than the red. But also I noticed long tentacle anemones tend to be pretty easier to get your clowns to go inside the anemone. So just stick around to see if the clowns are going to pair up with its host anemone. So one thing that I'm doing is I'm gonna add the whole anemone with the glass jar in here. So what I did is I emptied out most of the water and added just clean fresh water without the iodine dip. And then I throw the whole anemone in the aquarium and then just let the anemone do its thing. Eventually they'll crawl out and then you should be pretty much set. The anemone in these little glass jars are pretty cool because eventually the anemone will crawl out on its own. That way you don't have to be messing around with it. Especially I don't want to mess with it more since I know the little foot's a little bit damaged, but for the most part, the anemone's pretty healthy and doing pretty good. So this aquarium started with just dry base rock. It was pretty white, and now as you see, the coralline algae starting to grow. My rock is starting to turn purple. Once the aquarium cycled, what I did is I did a Re-Aquascape, and if you follow the last video, you'll see everything that I did. I had lots of hair algae, and the clowns were hosting the hair algae, so that was pretty cool. That's why I went with this anemone. Well, originally the tank was going to be for the anemone, or a little anemone tank, and then I was going to build the reef around it. So you can see the little euphyllia that I had. So it's pretty cool little euphyllia. It's the same one in my little 2-gallon. This tank is just going to be simple, something you can recreate at home. But the purpose of this video is to show you how to introduce your little anemone into your aquarium. So as long as your water chemistry is good, honestly, your anemone should heal up if you damaged it. But if your anemone is really damaged, what you want to do is dip it in the reef dip in iodine. It'll definitely help it heal up, and then you just gotta pray and hope that it heals up. Also, another thing that I do is that I keep my pH high. I add a little bit of carbonate and hydroxide into the water. There's different hydroxides you could use. I recommend the sodium hydroxide or even calcium hydroxide. I don't know if it exists in nature, but you could also go with potassium hydroxide and magnesium hydroxide. And like you see right now, the anemone is starting to crawl out. So once it crawls out, that's when you're gonna see me take out the little jar. So I put this frag rock to get the Space Invader and the Rostozoas out of the way. As you see, the anemone is crawling right where they were. As you see, the anemone is pretty big. It covers most of my rock work. So the anemone was in the jar for a few days. Eventually it came out, and then I just took out the jar. I'm not sure if the clownfish noticed the anemone, but for sure they're staying away from it. They probably don't know what it is. These aren't tank raised clowns, so they probably never been inside of the anemone. I know the anemone is gonna move because I'm gonna upgrade the little return pump. So I want to update the pump on here because I want to have more water flow. So I'm probably going to add a little Rio 1200 because it's small enough, I believe, to go in the back chamber. The original pump of the Innovative Marine 14-gallon is pretty weak in my opinion, but also it's not reliable. I would have just kept it like that, but I broke the little ceramic shaft that came on there. I'm having trouble to find replacement parts. Maybe I got to go to their website, but even then I can't find the little impeller. Well, I don't need the impeller, I just need a little ceramic shaft. So depending on the region where you get your corals or your anemones, you either want to go more white or more blue. But on these little kessels, for the most part, they'll grow corals and your anemones at all the spectrums that it comes in originally. So you just got to tune it into whatever color you like and then pretty much leave it. If you're always changing the color spectrum, it's kind of like starting over and your corals have to readapt to that light spectrum. So I turkey based the rock to get all the debris out. You want to make sure you siphon all the nastiness from the sand bed. You don't want to have that in your aquarium. When you gravel vac the sand, honestly, there shouldn't be a lot of cloud in the water. It should pretty much stay the same. Even if the sand is really dirty, you shouldn't be clouding your water like that. That just means you got to practice more with the gravel vac or your little siphon. I really want the clowns to host an anemone, so sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So I captured the clowns and then I put them in this glass jar and I put it upside down. So there's only one way out, and that's to go through the anemone. So I had this anemone for like about 2 weeks now, and it's probably going on its third. But I got it on December 19th, and then right now it's almost going to be New Year's. So join me next time to see if the anemone is actually going to host the clowns. So that'll be something pretty cool to see. So make sure you watch the next update on this video. So right now the anemone is still where it's at in the front corner glass. and I'm just gonna leave it there, do its thing. From what I can see right now, it's actually dividing, but like I said, you want to check out the future video and see the progress of this anemone, or even if it dies, make sure you stick around and see what happens. Once you build the reef around the anemone, you just gotta make sure and watch out when it splits, because the second anemone is gonna wander off a little bit, and then you don't want to make sure that it doesn't sting any of your corals or anything that's around the anemone. Because the rose anemone kind of looks like lava and fire, I'm gonna call this tank Lago de Fuego. That'd be a pretty badass name for this little 14-gallon innovative marine. That's probably gonna be the name of this title of this video, Lago de Fuego. If you're new to the hobby, something you really want to do is be testing. You want to test a lot. You don't need to test every day, but at least test once a week for sure, maybe even twice a week. If you're struggling with this aquarium and you want my help, make sure you contact me and I could help you a lot more. But I could especially help you out more if you live in America. I could ship you some salt if you really want some. And like I said, it'll be easier for you since I handled all the chemistry work for you. All you gotta do is just add a little bit of iodine and trace elements and you should be solid. So this is the 65-gallon aquarium where I got the anemone. I'm gonna do a water change, so make sure you tune in for the next video on that one. So make sure you read the description and follow all the links that I have. It's gonna take you to all my social media and make sure you follow along. Alright, so that's the end of the video. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification. Because if you don't, the person you're competing or even everybody in YouTube, they're gonna have a better aquarium than you.